Happy Saturday, fellow patriots. In this weekly wrap-up of Canadian politics, veteran political strategist Sean Schnell and I discuss a whole mess of things, including why is Mark Carney musing about using emergency powers? The New Democratic Party had a meltdown over nuclear-grade polling numbers. We have questions about why Liberal frontrunner Mark Carney won't disclose all of his sweet assets. The Liberals also said some crazy things about the budget this week, which you need to know about. There's leadership debates that are happening next week. And there were a bunch of public policy announcements this week, including a monorail. And also the CBC wants more of your money. Sean, how are you?
I am well. It has been another busy week, though, in Canadian politics. A lot going on.
It has. And Mark Carney wants to use emergency powers. This guy, I don't think he's got any self-awareness. And also the comment that he made on this is going to, I think, raise a lot of concerns for Canadians who really didn't like it when the Liberals used emergency powers the last time they did, which was only a few short years ago.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of conversation about this. There already has been a lot of conversation about this. Like you said, the comments that he made, we actually have the clip here. So maybe if people haven't heard it.
Sure, let's play that. Here.
And something that my government is going to do is to use all of the powers of the federal government, including the emergency powers of the federal government, to accelerate the major projects that we need in order to build this economy and take on the Americans.
Okay, pump me.
What does that mean? What does he mean?
I'm not sure he knows what he means.
I'm not sure either. I thought this was like a really worrisome remark, putting it mildly. This is a guy who has sat on some of the most senior boards in the world, including the World Economic Forum. He's been a champion of sort of far left policy for the last decade. He's only really come back to Canada to become anointed as prime minister by the Liberal Party. Now he's talking about using emergency powers. I don't know. I think we should have some questions there.
Well, there's definitely needs to be some questions. And as we were saying, I'm not sure he exactly knows what he means when he's using those words. And that's what's a little bit frightening about this is, and we've talked about this before. This is a guy that's not elected that is running for the position of prime minister, and your words matter. The precision of your words matter. And so when he's throwing out the words emergency powers, is he talking about the Emergencies Act? Is he talking about legislation going through Parliament? Is he talking about something else? This is where the questions start to come into play. And that's when Canadians start to get concerned. Like you said, the last government under Justin Trudeau that used the emergencies power, it was found in court to be unconstitutional. And there was lots of questions about that. And so Mark Carney, when he's throwing around words like using emergency powers, people's mind immediately jump to what was just not all that long ago political history in Canada here, and start to ask questions about, well, what do you mean? How would you use it? What are you talking about? And he needs to answer questions about that, and he's not. And so it's certainly a concern. And it highlights that this is a guy that does not appear to be ready for prime time, let alone taking on the reins of prime minister. And the fact that he won't answer those questions, and he will say one thing one day and another thing another day, and his team's out there trying to clean up this mess, it's concerning, because we are days away from what could be Mark Carney taking over as prime minister.
You're spot on. Like another point just to make, to emphasize that, is Mark Carney is surrounded by Justin Trudeau's team. Mark Carney is just like Justin Trudeau. So he's got all of the cabinet that were there for the invocation of the Emergencies Act. He's got all the senior staff that were there for the invocation of the Emergencies Act, for the most part, with like a very few exceptions. And he owes it to the public to say what he means, but he's been super sneaky. I did know that this week they had a couple of their campaign spinners out in the media trying to explain these, I wouldn't even say they're gaffes, just like bozo eruptions from their candidate.
Yeah.
They called it muddled. He had some muddled messaging in his campaign this week. And I'm like, no, maybe he's just saying the quiet part out loud. Like, this is a guy who just wants to come in and use emergency powers to ram through whatever his agenda is, even though he hasn't been elected at all. He's never been elected by, in any sort of general election. Parliament's Perot. The Liberals have, shut me out of Parliament. And, here you've got this guy saying he's going to use emergency powers. It's crazy. I can't believe we're having this conversation.
And even if you were to take that at face value, what his spinners are going out and saying that this is muddled messaging, which I agree with you. I think it's more likely that he's saying what he means, and Canadians should take him at face value for that. But if you were to even grant that muddled messaging, this is a guy that wants to be prime minister in the midst of negotiations with the Americans over tariffs and industry and everything like this. And so they're coming out and saying, "Oh, sorry, we've had a bad messaging week. We've muddled our messaging." Well, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. If you're trying to seek the office of prime minister in the midst of a crisis of the Liberals' own making, going in and negotiating with an American administration with muddled messaging isn't going to cut it. People's lives depend on this. Their livelihoods depend on this. And so businesses and Canadians that are watching this say, "Oh, well, I'm sorry, we couldn't quite get our messaging right today. We are a little bit muddled." That tells you everything you need to know about the qualifications of this individual going into the top negotiating job for the country in the midst of crisis.
Absolutely. This guy's not ready for prime time, but some Liberal pollsters think he is. There was so this is a crazy story this week. So we've talked about polling numbers for the last few episodes. That we expected to see some movement on the Conservatives and whatnot, because being at 45%, that's
almost unheard of or historic, right?
Oh, Stephen Harper won his majority government in 2011 with, I think it was like 38.5% of the vote. But this week, people who lost their minds over the polls were the New Democratic Party. So there were some polls that came out that showed the Liberals' fortunes had improved, but not at the expense of the Conservative Party, at the expense of the NDP. Like cratering numbers for the NDP. And I know you always want to talk about the NDP polling numbers, but can we just, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, let's show some of the reactions from the NDP to these polling numbers. So this is a senior caucus member within the NDP, and he calls it, I want to keep this podcast clean, Sean. So he calls these numbers total bull hockey. And he actually accuses the Liberals. He says, Liberal funded polls by Liberal pollsters spawned by Liberal pundits saying the NDP is done. And he's saying that this happens every election. I think it's a different story. And I think it has to do with the NDP voter base and how the NDP vote actually moves around election. And you're an expert in this, and I know you want to talk about this.
Yeah. So in some regards, the NDP that are melting down on this are correct that this is sort of a recurring conversation that happens around elections, especially with the NDP voter base as they move around a little bit. And so listeners may have heard of a term called strategic voting before, and there are some, and I don't think this is widespread as sometimes pollsters or
I agree with
like
you.
to talk about, but there is a small segment, I believe, of the population that does have their vote that moves around a little bit, often between the NDP and the Liberals,
particularly in polls.
Yeah, and usually from the NDP to the Liberals for a strategic purpose of voting more against somebody than voting for something. And you are perhaps seeing a little bit of that in these polls where you have NDP individuals that are open to voting for either the Liberals or the NDP, that are selecting the Liberals for any variety of reasons. Like, you could hypothesize a number of reasons as to why this is happening, but that is perhaps what is causing this meltdown. But what is crazy about this is not where the NDP numbers have been for the last number of months. In fact, in the fall, we actually saw the NDP numbers at some of the highest levels they had been in a number of years. And yet, this party decided to prop up Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, despite public polls showing that they were at historic low levels in support across the country, and they continued to prop them up. And so it is a bit ironic now that you have the NDP that are coming out and losing their minds over polling numbers that really, you could argue, are of their own making, because really they have done nothing in the last 4 years to differentiate themselves from the Liberals. So one could argue, why wouldn't voters that are open to voting for the NDP perhaps in a poll say that they're open to voting for the Liberals, or vice versa? Because there really is not a lot of difference between.
They're interchangeable. Like I could see a universe where Carney, again, Mark Carney is an unelected man. He hasn't been tested in the heat of a general election. I could see a universe where he completely flames out and people are like, okay, I don't want this guy, I want the other guy. And you have to, they're the NDP, we call them the NDP Liberals for a reason, because they are interchangeable. They've all been responsible for the policies that have increased taxes, caused the housing crisis, caused inflation in Canada. Like they're interchangeable. But I just to your point, like let's rewind, record scratch, rewind to the fall when the NDP literally had the Liberals, their like historic arch nemesis, on the ropes. The Liberals were in polling at like fourth party status, and the Liberals were, or the NDP were polling at, kind of historic highs for them in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, not today. I think we'll give them a chance to switch their leader out and rebound in the polls. And like these guys, like if there are any NDP listening to this, what are you doing? What are you doing? You are not serious people. You need to get your campaign together. Like, please do that. I just, oh man,
it boggles the mind, and I don't want to spend too much time trying to hypothesize about what goes on in the mind of the NDP caucus or their leader. But really, you've got Jagmeet Singh now coming out and saying, yes, we'll no longer be supporting the Liberals, and they've lost the right to rule. Well, honestly, what changed? What changed from November, December, when they were propping them up in confidence motions, to January, February, other than Justin Trudeau shutting down Parliament? Nothing changed. They haven't proposed new policy.
Oh, something changed.
Different
You're
change.
wrong.
Okay,
what did change? What
changed?
changes next week, Sean, for Jagmeet Singh? I think it's, or maybe it was February 19th. I'm not sure. Jagmeet Singh vests his pension.
The pension. Sure. Okay.
That's his pension. Vests his pension, Sean. You can't forget that.
That's right. So that's a perfect example of say one thing, do another, right? So nothing material about the reasons they presented to Canadians have changed. But yes, the pocketbook issues for one individual in particular have changed.
It's just like it's a joke. It's been a joke watching them in Parliament. We need an election. I can't. It's too much. Okay. The NDP, we've settled. I think we're in agreement that they don't have their act together right now. But I want to circle back to press conference. Actually, I did this morning. We're recording it on Friday. We're recording this on Friday, the 21st. Mm-hmm. Mark Carney still won't disclose his sizable assets to the Canadian public, and I just want to explain why this is a problem. And then what we were talking about today with regard to potential assets that he may or may not have, we don't know, with a company that is involved in a significant policy issue with the federal government right now, as well as Canadian small businesses. So Mark Carney, because he's not elected, he's not technically, by the letter of the law, subject to federal ethics disclosure rules that any member of parliament would be subject to, including myself. Mm-hmm. So every year I am required to disclose a summary of basically any sort of financial instruments that I hold, income, etc., whatnot, so that is available to the general public for people to see whether or not I have potential conflicts of interest in any files that I'm either voting on or speaking on. Now, I'm in the opposition. Imagine how important that is for somebody who's in the cabinet, who has the ability to bring forward government legislations or memorandums to cabinet. Now, amplify that to prime minister. And you have Mark Carney, who's not elected, and he could become prime minister and not be subject to these laws because of a loophole. Now, this loophole is that elected officials, public office holders, have there's a 60-day sort of grace period to disclose certain financial assets. That law did not foresee a super rich, by his own words, globalist elitist becoming prime minister and not holding elected office. So just indulge me. The reason why this is important, like we don't, like, this guy has chaired the boards of multi-billion-dollar companies, including Brookfield. Typically, with a position like that, somebody would be offered a very lucrative compensation package, which could include certain financial instruments like stock options or whatever.
Sure.
But with Stripe, this is a multi-billion-dollar payment company that he sat on the board for. There's been recent suggestions and rumors that it might be going from privately held status to public status, having an initial public offering. And it's been valuated at anywhere between $65 billion American to about $85 billion American. So can you imagine what the stock options would be worth on a company like that? So, he should be disclosing this to the public just out of like a position of moral clarity. But also, what I was talking about this morning is that Stripe's been involved in a major public policy dispute with the government because, long story short, they refused to pass along savings from a program that Visa and MasterCard engaged in that was designed to reduce fees for small businesses. So Stripe's kind of a middleman in financial management or in financial transactions. These savings that were supposed to go from Visa and MasterCard lowering certain types of fees for small businesses actually got pocketed by Stripe in certain situations. And who was on the board when that happened? Mark Carney. And who was advising the prime minister in a senior economic advisory capacity during that time? Mark Carney. And this is the type of decision that could potentially make the valuation of the company higher going into a public offering. And if this guy holds instruments like financial assets in the company and he's not disclosing it, that's something that Canadians should know, right? So I think he should be disclosing this. I think it's crazy that could be prime minister and exercise this loophole.
Yeah, I mean, these are the sorts of questions that Canadians are entitled to have answers to before going into an election. And then Canadians are able to make a decision about whether they want somebody like Mark Carney, who has business interests or potential conflicts, to be in a position of power. But these are questions that they can't have answers to because he refuses to answer them. I've got the screenshot from your article that people can check out here today. So there's the title of it: Carney must disclose his assets in Stripe, call to pass along fee savings. So that's on your Substack that people can check it out. And I watched the press conference that you gave this morning, and what was most interesting to me was actually the Q&A afterwards, because the media didn't ask a single question about the press conference you were there to talk about. No follow-up on why is this important? Do you think this needs to happen before the election? How are you going to keep pressure on? No, they asked a whole bunch of
They asked me if we were going to defund the CBC, and I was like, yes. Can we also talk about what I just talked about?
Yeah, and
it's wild.
This is why it is important that you're talking about it and others are talking about it, and then people are taking your article and sharing it with others, because the media is certainly not talking about this. They don't seem particularly concerned about it, which benefits only one person, Mark Carney.
You raise a really good point there. And this is something that anybody who subscribes to this channel will hear me talk about over and over again. It's so important for people to subscribe to channels like this. Just if you're watching this on Substack, please share the Substack link with people. Set your podcast to auto download, because the legacy media, the left-leaning legacy media, they don't want to vet Mark Carney. They're not vetting him. They're not asking these tough questions. And this was another example of it where, I was using my reach that I have on Substack, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, to try and get a message out that this could be a significant issue for Mark Carney, and nobody's vetting him. Nobody's asking these tough questions. And like, it is wild to me that this unelected man could become prime minister and not have to disclose what is likely significant financial interests in multi-billion-dollar companies, and not just one multi-billion-dollar company, multiple multi-billion-dollar companies.
Yeah, well, and it raises a lot of questions. And if there are no conflicts of interest, if there are no business interests, it's a really easy conversation for Mark Carney to have. But he's not coming out and saying that. So then it raises more question, more suspicion. I've seen over the last few weeks, as you and other conservatives have been putting the pressure on around this, a number of liberals and people from the left that have been tripping over themselves and ripping their hair out to say, this isn't necessary. He's only a candidate, and candidates aren't subject to those types of rules. But I remember watching people on the left ripping their hair out when another candidate south of the border was saying that he wasn't going to disclose his financial assets. And when Donald Trump was running for president the first time, he said, I'm going to disclose my financials, and then didn't. And people lost their minds over it. And people of the same political persuasion are now coming to some sort of defense of not vetting this guy. And listen, you can't have your cake and eat it too on this. And Canadians, regardless of how you vote or your political stripe, are owed accountability and transparency when it comes to their elected officials and how they conduct business. Like you said, this is not something new. This is something that members of parliament and members of cabinet and the prime minister have been subject to for a long time. The only difference here is, for the first time, we potentially are going to see an unelected individual take the reins of power without having to go through that same level of scrutiny and ethics process and become prime minister. And so it is more than fair. I believe it should be required that these questions receive answers. And the fact that he won't, and the fact that the media won't push him on this, just continues to raise more question and concern.
I totally agree with you in that. It just really rankles me that the Liberals aren't doing this, and nor frankly are his leadership contenders, like his leadership competitors. So I guess we can jump into a preview of something that is going to happen next week, which is the Liberal leadership debate. So that's going to happen on Monday and Tuesday. We'll talk more about this on next week's episode before it happens. But we've talked about the media not vetting Mark Carney, who is by far the front runner. What do you think some of the other candidates need to do during the debates next week if they want to make any headway against Carney?
Well, I think they absolutely have to try and make some headway against Carney. He has been sucking up, as it said in politics, all the oxygen in the room. He's been getting all the headlines, all the attention. There were some numbers out earlier this week that showed some initial fundraising numbers for the candidates, and Mark Carney was far, far ahead. And it was actually shocking to see Chrystia Freeland basically in fourth place in the fundraising game there. And so when we're talking about the leadership debates coming up, I think that it is critical, if any of these other individuals are planning to get some kind of momentum going and get at least somewhat competitive, the debates are almost their last best shot at doing this. So what do they need to do? They are going to have to get Carney to answer some questions. They are going to have to get him to explain exactly some of the bizarre policy, muddled messaging nonsense that he's been putting out. And not only explain himself to Liberals, but explain himself to the Canadian public. And then they are going to have to try and put something on the table, I think, that is of interest to Canadians and Liberal voters that are going to ultimately decide this thing, that gets some level of excitement going for them. But I think the main thing that they're going to have to do is do exactly what you said the media hasn't been doing, which is vet Mark Carney and start asking him some of these questions. Specifically, I think on the carbon tax, and how he can go from 1 minute being the chief architect of the carbon tax to coming out and talking himself in circles about what his plan is. I'm going to get rid of the carbon tax, but I'm going to replace the carbon tax. I'm going to make businesses pay you for the carbon tax, and it's going to be cheaper for you and them and me and everybody. And nothing what he's talking about makes any sense. But nobody's really following up on him. And so I think if I was to give any advice to Chrystia Freeland or Karina Gold, or if the others are going to be there as well, is they have to get him to try and start answering some questions specifically on the policies that he's been putting out, and exactly what we were talking about, where his personal interests may or may not lie as somebody that is coming into politics for the first time.
No, and like I hope they take a swing at him. I think they're deluding themselves if they think, first of all, I think he's going to take swings at all of them. I think you kind of alluded to that already. I think, and even if he's not going to take a swing at them in the debate, which I think he will, they've been like Team Carney / Trudeau have been doing everything possible to push everybody else out, particularly like when you look at how they undermined Chrystia Freeland by trying to force her out of her job ahead of, the fall economic statement. They've been so dismissive of her, and even Karina Gould, who has made a remarkable showing, I think, in the last few weeks. So I hope that like both Freeland and Gould, at a bare minimum, take some shots at him, because like this guy is he's one of these guys that doesn't think that he has to that he should be challenged on anything. And I hope that they don't just sit back and let him just run away with it. So, I mean, for listeners, we'll do a full debate analysis next week. And I'll have more to say on this in coming days. But there was one thing that I hope that they debate on Monday and Tuesday, and that was this crazy thing that Mark Carney said this week about the federal budget. Now, just as we're introducing this segment and this topic, Sean, we're old. Now we are old. We've seen some things.
Seen a few things. Seen a few campaigns.
In 2015, there was this sort of key moment in the campaign where Justin Trudeau said, do you remember? He's like, oh, I'll just have very small budgets, very small, little itty bitty budgets. And then Stephen Harper was like, oh yeah, he's saying little itty bitty budgets, and or not budgets, deficits, little itty bitty deficits. And Harper kind of mocked him for this, because he knew that this guy was going to blow the doors off of the debt in Canada, and he did. Now you've got Mark Carney. Actually, you know what? Can we just play the clip of this, because it's so nonsensical? Yeah. I just think people need to listen to him talk about budgets.
And the essence of this is to spend less and invest more.
Okay, so he's saying spend less and invest more. This is his new slogan. So what that means, just for anybody who needs translation out of liberal to normal person, is spend more and spend more. Spend more and hide the spending. So I would like to use an example of this that you may be familiar with. This I'll admit, this is a deep confessional. I have used this line with my husband before, where I'm like, honey, like, the spa day, a day at the spa, it's not spending, it's an investment. It's an investment into myself, right? And so this is literally what he's saying. He's saying that, like, I think what he was trying to say is that he's going to create two budgets. like, is he trying to, what's an investment? Is an investment like the We Charity scandal or the SNC Lavalin? Like,
I don't
how
know.
dumb does he think Canadians are, really?
I think he's trying to sound super smart, and Canadians think this sounds really dumb.
Do you
sound
think
really
so?
stupid. I think it's I don't know. I can't for the life of me try to figure out what he's trying to say with this, because anybody on its face, when you say spend less, invest more, you say, well, which is it? You're saying two different things. What are we supposed to, what does that mean? And this is where the media needs to be holding this guy accountable, or the other Liberal leadership, because he must think people are stupid. But what does that mean? Spend less, invest more. That doesn't mean anything.
It's not spending, it's an investment in me, right? Like, it's,
yeah.
I have tried this scam with my husband. I have. It doesn't work. He's like, no, honey, you're just spending money. Yeah, well, you got to try, right? So, I mean, I guess
try it with your credit card company, right? I wasn't spending.
That's a great point.
This was an investment. It was an investment in something, right? And it's again, like you said with 2015. Actually, Pierre put out a tweet that I'll throw up here.
Sure. Yeah, let's put it up there.
That really outlined this for everybody, where it talks exactly what you were talking about. Justin Trudeau proposes modest deficits. And now he's talking about these small deficits.
It's the same thing. He's just like Justin. He is just like Justin.
And this is it. This is it.
This is a 2015 playbook, right?
These Liberals have shown Canadians for 10 years exactly who they are. They have not changed. And it doesn't matter what type of leader they have, or what sort of crazy spend less, invest more slogan that they put out there. They are the same Liberals. Like you said, this is Justin Trudeau's team around this guy. This is Justin Trudeau's cabinet that is supporting this guy. They are all the same players. So I have no idea what he's trying to say with this, other than Canadians should hold on to their wallets if this guy gets elected. That's all I know, because everything he's talking about echoes what Justin Trudeau was saying in 2015. And so
100%.
the only people that have been consistent on this is the Conservatives, saying that they are going to fix the budget and have presented some policies to explain exactly what that looks like, which I might add, the media have been ripping their hair out for the last number of years, saying, well, what does fix the budget mean? Does that mean you're going to slash, cut, and burn? And no, it's not. Here's the plan. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to get the country back on track. And then Mark Carney comes out and says, spend less, invest more. Crickets. Nothing.
No. They're not pushing back on that at all. Like 100%, they're not. And I guess, this wasn't on our topic list, but there's sort of a corollary subject to that. And that's our party leader, Pierre Poilievre. He was out this week and he was asked by the media in sort of a related topic. He was asked, well, why are you saying Canada's broken? Canada's not broken. Canada's not broken, blah, 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 blah. Well, the reality is that the people who are in power in Canada, the Liberals of the itty bitty deficits, have doubled the size of Canada's debt, caused an inflation crisis, and made most of our democratic institutions and public policy systems far less functional. Everything from the fentanyl crisis, catch and release bail, people not being able to afford groceries, the housing crisis, rent, our immigration system is broken. Like, you can talk about how there are public policy failures that the Liberals have created while also looking at a way forward. And you have to admit that there's a problem in order to fix it, right? And I guess that brings us back into this comment about Carney and hello, deja vu, 2015 wants its campaign back, right? Like Pierre said in that tweet. Like they want Canadians to believe that running that same playbook that they had in 2015 that has caused these systemic issues in the country, that have made issues or made life so much harder for Canadians that don't worry, we're just going to do it again and get a completely different result. And that's wild. That's bananas. And I have a feeling, and I think that this is reflected in some of the public polling that's come out in the last few weeks, that Canadians aren't buying it. And I think that come election time, like in the middle of a campaign, when people are really vetting these cabinet candidates and thinking who they're going to vote for, they're not going to buy this from Mark Carney. They're just not.
Yeah, no, I think you are 100% right, and I think it shows the double standard between how the media has treated Pierre and the Conservatives as we have rolled out all kinds of policies, and how this guy Carney is getting away with saying crazy things and virtually no pushback on it. And I've seen the comments from reporters that have been saying, wow, you can't be saying that Canada's broken. Well, there's a lot of people that have been struggling for the last decade under the Liberals, then where things haven't been working very well. Like you said, there's issues with parts of the immigration system, and there's been issues with passports and government processing services and things like this, not to mention like record high food bank use and crime that's out of control and the fentanyl crisis. I mean, you look at this and you say, well, there's a lot of parts of the country that aren't working for people, and so if they're not working, then they need to be fixed. And so when we talk about things like fixing the budget and axing the tax and getting people back into homes and things like that, that's what we're talking about. And people know that, people understand that, because this is their lived experience. They fully understand this, and then they see the double standard of what's being pushed against the Conservatives and Pierre, and what's not happening against the Liberals and Carney, and quite frankly against even Justin Trudeau when he was running amok. And they're saying, you know what, there is a need for change in this country, and it's not a change at the head of the Liberal Party, it's a change of government, and that is what is needed. And so I think, going back to what we were talking about with the polls, the encouragement that we're seeing there is that Canadians that are showing their intention to vote for the Conservatives are staying pretty much steady. There are a lot of voters that are saying, no, we need real change in this country, not superficial change, which is what Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, or any of the other candidates represent. That is superficial change. That is not real change. And that is what people know that they need in order to fix the things that are broken. Listen, Canada's a great country. We have many things going for us, but there are a lot of things that need some serious attention, and voters know that. And I just don't think that they think the Liberals are the ones to get it done. And
I agree with you. And
we have an election.
I think so too. And like, just to reemphasize the point I made earlier, I do think that like the Liberals prorogued Parliament because they didn't want the spotlight of public scrutiny on their crappy decisions. Totally. But when an election comes, Canadians are going to pay attention again, because it's an election. And I know that I believe in our country, and I believe that people are going to reject this. I can't get over that he used literally the 2015 playbook of the Liberal Party, the Justin Trudeau playbook, the itty bitty deficit playbook, hoping that people would ignore it. But okay, I want to close this episode off with some major public policy announcements that were made this week. Parliament's not sitting, but there's two big issues that Parliament would have been seized with had it been sitting this week, and that people need to know about. And before I tell you what they are, I just have to go on a little bit of a nerd rant.
Okay. In
that the government, Justin Trudeau, should not be making major public policy decisions right now, because he's a lame duck prime minister. Okay. And in theory, when Parliament's prorogued, the government is under something called a caretaker principle, where you're just kind of, you're managing the day-to-day operations, but you're not doing anything new. Well, he blew that out of the window this week.
Yeah.
And, there's a whole other episode to do just on how he was able to do that. This is crazy. So again, Parliament's not sitting, and he made two major announcements, like I think it was $80 billion for this first one here. And here it is. Here's the announcement. He announced a straight out of a Simpsons episode, a monorail. No, I'm kidding, but a high-speed rail from Quebec City to Toronto, which the price tag is between $60 and $90 billion. Now, I am all for public transit in Canada. But this announcement, first of all, in the announcement, they didn't say where this money was coming from. They also admitted they didn't have it scoped at all, like not scoped whatsoever. And I think that one of the companies that was attached to this, I'd have to double check, was actually SNC-Lavalin.
Yeah.
This is, like, come on, really, like Parliament needs to be sitting. Like, how is Trudeau just making major announcements like this? And this, it was
I think
like,
most people want to know that.
yes, this is crazy. Okay, I am going to go on a huge tangent here, unless you interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Okay. The Green Line in Calgary. Let's compare this to other pieces of public transit infrastructure that have just been completely mismanaged by levels of left-wing governments, including the federal Liberal Party. So when I saw this announcement about an unscoped $90 billion piece of transit infrastructure that was announced by a lame duck prime minister while Parliament wasn't sitting, the first thing I thought of was the Green Line in Calgary. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this project, it was back in 2015. And it was actually the former Harper government allocated, I think it was $1.5 billion to build a train line from all the way the north end of Calgary to the south end that would take about 50,000 cars off the road every day. And there was a proposed routing that would have been fairly easy to manage. And then over the course of several years, the left-wing city council, they spent a lot of money. They didn't lay a single meter of track. They spent a lot of money on consultants on something called shredding, where they were, consulting with the community about livability. And it's like, where's the track? Where's the train? So now this project is, I think it's a quarter of what it was originally scoped for, and it's like 4 times the cost, maybe 5, 6, I don't even know at this point. And that is with the Liberal Party has no private sector company would ever hire the Liberal Party of Canada to build anything. And now you've got a lame duck prime minister who's announcing this money while Parliament is prorogued with no scope.
Yeah, I think this is outrageous. Really, it is insane that Trudeau, like you said, who really is it should be in caretaker mode right now, is out making any kind of policy announcements, let alone one of this magnitude. And we're not only in the midst of a Liberal leadership race, we're on the eve of an election, whether it be this spring or in the fall. We don't have Parliament. We don't have a federal budget here. You've got all kinds of individuals, whether it be Mark Carney or others, running around making announcements about what they would do if they're prime minister. And so the question is, well, how does this fit in to any of those plans? We've got a massive crisis right now as the clock is ticking for this challenge with the American tariffs, and there is questions about how the Canadian government is going to respond to that and support businesses. And again, you're talking about billions and billions of dollars being shoveled out the door for this project. When, where, how is this happening? There are so many challenges that we are facing at the moment, and you've got this prime minister who has done so much damage coming in at the last minute and on his way out the door saying, yep, here's the Trudeau train.
Trudeau train. Oh no, yeah. It's gonna stick if you say that. Take it back.
Sorry, I won't say that. So
I know, no,
the monorail.
It's never going to get built under this. With the Liberal government does not have the capacity to build anything. That is like, pick your public infrastructure project and look at it. They don't get it. They don't get it done. And that's my beef with this. Is, again, we need public infrastructure. We do, but the Liberals, their hallmark has been wasting money. Like, literally, it just disappears and evaporates as opposed to actually getting anything built.
And at what point did these Liberal MPs say enough is enough of this? Like, we're not sitting in Parliament here right now.
None of those guys deserve to get reelected.
No, and so again, So am I. But I think even Liberal voters, or those that are voting for the NDP, have got to be sitting back and saying, how does this make any sense? That you've got this prime minister that should have the authority to do nothing at this point in time, is shoveling billions of dollars out the door, and you've got Liberal members of parliament that are just saying, yeah, well, I guess that makes sense. We just shut our parliament and we just keep making announcement after announcement after announcement about spending taxpayer dollars. And then you've got the NDP that were complicit in this whole thing for years. So it's insane. This is not how a country is supposed to run. And that's what I think most people need to take away from this is not how a country is supposed to be run.
Well, which brings us to the other major policy announcement this week from this caretaker lamed up government, which is that the CBC needs more money, double money, Sean. That is what the government announced this week. Now, the outgoing heritage minister, she's just announced she's not going to run again, gave a press conference, and you have to listen to this clip. It is absolutely crazy what she said.
The existence of our public broadcaster depends on a single line in the budget. I'm proposing that we remove the decision making around funding from the political cycles, whether it's the elections or the budget.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, we shouldn't. The CBC shouldn't be subject to parliamentary scrutiny. It should just be forever funded and forever increased, with forever executive bonuses and forever no journalistic objectivity. Let's just give more. Can't believe what she said there.
I can, because these guys have no regard for Canadian taxpayer dollars.
But it's not even
crazy.
that. It's like authoritarian what she's saying. I think she's essentially saying, well, let's just spend more money. And we didn't get into it, but some people ran the numbers on what she was proposing. It was essentially allowing for almost a doubling of their operating budget after these guys have just had scandal after scandal on executive bonuses and relevance and bias. And now she's, you've got this Trudeau minister saying that it should be removed from the political cycle, which is a euphemism from, what does Parliament shouldn't have any oversight on using this expensive tax dollars. I'm just going to give it to them with no oversight. Like, come on.
But I mean, that's their operating reality right now, is no oversight of Parliament. They've shut the doors, they've closed it down. And so why not start putting out policy that makes that sort of operating reality permanent? Is, well, if we can get away with it for a few months without parliamentary oversight, maybe we can get away with it forever. And so this again is another example of why a functioning parliament is necessary in order to hold these guys accountable and provide. It doesn't matter who the government is. When you are proposing this level of structural change and funding to an organization like the CBC, it requires oversight, and Canadians are owed some level of transparency and accountability.
Absolutely.
And right now there is none, because who's gonna provide it? The CBC? They're going to ask the hard-hitting questions on this.
Like, and I know I say this every time I talk about the CBC, but it is worth repeating that the institution changed their journalistic standards and practices to remove a requirement for objectivity. Mm-hmm. Like they're actually saying, well, we're just okay with some types of bias, and I just think that's wild. So Parliament needs to come back. We need an election. I think, the one thing I want listeners to take away from this episode this week is that these things are actually happening in Canada. We have the government announcing major expenditures while Parliament is prorogued. You have the ruling governing party shutting opposition out of the House of Commons. You have an unelected man about to become appointed prime minister by a small number of insiders, where he's not disclosing what are likely to be, or it could be, I don't know. He should be disclosing this significant financial assets. And it's just censorship, bills.
Yeah, well, this matters. Like, that's what people need
matters.
to understand is this matters. And as we're talking about all of this, information is power for people in Canada. And I understand that people are busy, and it's in large part because the Liberals have made life so hard for people that they are working harder, working more, working longer to try and just get ahead. And so it seems like these announcements and this news over and over again, it can be hard to digest, but that information is really what is power, because without that information, nothing will change. Nothing will change in this country if people do not take the time to understand what is going on about all of these things that we just talked about and share it with their friends and their family, because that is how change happens.
Information is power. And that's why the Liberals, I mean, something I think we'll talk about likely more next week. This is just bubbling up as a story. That same Minister of Heritage, she actually said, she made this allusion that there should be more government funding to combat misinformation this week, which likely means, more censorship of conservative voices. But that's a good teaser for next week. And it's also something that I'm going to be writing about this week. And as Sean said, for those of you who are listening, we are facing this, draconian government that has done everything to silence opposition voices. And that's why it's so important for you to click subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're watching this on Substack, thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribing to my newsletter there. But also, if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any other place that you get your podcasts, click auto download so that you get this information coming to you. This is not stuff that's being reported in the legacy media for all of the reasons that we've talked about on this episode. But you can be sure that we are fighting hard. We know that Canada is worth fighting for, and we'll be coming back to you next week with a breakdown of what went down in Canadian politics. Working hard for you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. If you want even more political news, subscribe at michellerempelgarner.substack.com. And if you like what you hear, be sure to share this podcast.